Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to be showing how to paint the marked armours of the Dark Gods. Now, I'll be taking you through a step-by-step guide on how to paint each of these armours, such as Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, and also the Undivided marked armours. Now, I'm going to be starting with Khorne, and then we'll work through all the others after that as well. Now, the first thing we'll need to do is undercoat the model, and as you can see here, I've used Mechanica Standard Grey, which is perfect for the colours we're going to be applying. You'll also notice all the cloaks have been done. This was done in a previous video by Nick, so if you want to see how that's done, check that out as well. So the first colour we're going to be applying is Khorne Red. So I'm going to be using a medium base brush. All I'm going to do is apply a couple of dollops like so to the palette. And as it's a base paint, it can be quite thick and goopy, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water just to make it easy to apply. Now on this particular model, I'm just going to be painting the shield. So I'm just going to start by base coating that like so. Now you might want to do a couple of thin coats just to get a nice even coverage. There we are with the base coat now applied. What we're going to do now is move on to applying a shade. Now for this we'll be using Nuln Oil. So what I'm going to do is use my medium shade brush. I'm just going to apply a little bit to the palette. This isn't to water it down, this is just so I don't overload the brush too much. So once I'm happy, we're then ready to start applying that to the shield. So what I'm going to do is just coat that all over like so, and you'll see it just starts to fall into those recesses. Once that's applied, you want to probably leave it for around about 30 minutes to fully dry. There we are with that shade now applied and dry. We're going to move on to our next step, which is to do some highlighting. Now for this we'll be using Evil Sunz Scarlet. So I'm going to use a small layer brush for this. I'm just going to apply a little bit to the palette and a little touch of water as well. Now the key thing is to get a nice point to the brush, because obviously we need to do that when we do highlighting. Now this is going to be the first highlight, so it needs to be a bit broader, ready for the second one, which will be a bit thinner. Just gives you a nice bit of transition. So all I'm going to do is start picking out some of those details like so. Now some of these areas you'll need to use the tip of the brush. Just take your time. If you do make any mistakes, just tidy back up. But around the edges, you can just use the edge of the brush like so. Just gives you a nice consistent line all the way through. There we are with that first highlight now done. We're going to move on to our final highlight for the Khorne marked armour. And for this we'll be using Fire Dragon Bright. So again, using the small layer brush, I'm just going to apply a little bit to the palette again, a little touch of water, and again getting it to a nice point as well. Now the important thing here is we're going to make these highlights a little bit smaller than the previous one, just to give you a nice little bit of transition. So all I want to do is just start picking some of those raised areas out like so. So little dots here and there, maybe the odd little line that's just a bit thinner than the Evil Sunz Scarlet. Take your time. If you make any mistakes, just tidy back up with the previous colour. There we are with that final highlight now done. Our Khorne marked armour is completed. So what we're going to do now is move on to the next armour, which is Tzeentch. So for this we'll be starting with Iron Hand Steel as a base coat. We'll then move on to using Ethematic Blue, which is a contrast paint. Following that we'll use another contrast paint, which will be Warp Lightning, and we'll finish off with a highlight of Stormhost Silver. But first of all, let's start with that base coat. So I'm going to be using my medium base brush for this. Just going to apply a little bit to the palette like so, not too much. A little touch of water like before. Once we've loaded the brush up, we're ready to start base coating. So we've got the model just here, so I'm just going to start coating all those armour panels in Iron Hand Steel. Obviously being mindful not to get any on that cloak. There we are with the Iron Hand Steel now base coated. What we're going to do now is use Ethematic Blue, which is a contrast paint, so we're using this straight from the pot. So all you need to do is just apply it all over the armour like so. If you do find it pooling heavily in the recesses, just use your brush to soak up any excess. With our first contrast now applied and dry, what we're going to do now is apply Warp Lightning to all those deeper recesses, especially around the rivets as well. With the Warp Lightning now applied, we're going to finish off by highlighting with Stormhost Silver. So little things like picking out the rivets and then just using the edge of the brush to pick out those armour panels. There we are with the highlight now done. Our Tzeentch armour is completed. So what I'm going to do now is move on to painting the Nurgle marked armour. For this we'll be using Deathguard Green as a base coat. We're then going to use Militarum Green applied all over. Then we'll finish off with two highlights, first with Straken Green, and following that we'll be using Nurgle Green. But first of all, let's start that base paint. So just going to get some Deathguard Green onto the palette, a couple of dollops, a little bit of water, not too much, and then we're ready to start painting it. So what I'm going to do is just start picking out that armour like so. Just apply it all over. You might want to do a couple of coats, whichever you prefer. With the Deathguard Green now applied, we're going to use Militarum Green and apply it all over the green armour. Again, as it's a contrast paint, just be careful it doesn't pool in those recesses, and just use your brush to soak up any excess. There we are with that contrast now applied. We're going to use Straken Green as a highlight. This is the first highlight, so I'm going to make it a little bit broader. So when we apply the second one, we get some nice definition there. With that first highlight done, we're now going to move on to Nurgle Green to do a finer highlight. We're just going to try and make this one a bit smaller than the previous, just to give a nice bit of definition. And then just pick out those rivets as well with a little dot here and there. And there we are, with the highlights now done, our Nurgle marked armour is completed. So what I'm going to do now is move on to painting the Slaanesh marked armour. Now for this we'll start with a base coat of Naggaroth Knight. After that we'll use some Black Templar just to drop into some of the deeper recesses and round some of the rivets. Following that we'll use Phoenician Purple as a highlight, then we'll use Cacophony Purple as a final highlight for that as well. So first of all, let's start with that base coat. So again, using my medium base brush, apply some to the palette, and again a little touch of water as well. Once we're happy with that, we're ready to start painting the armour and the shield. With the base coat now applied, we're going to use Black Templar and we're just going to start running this in the recesses. So take your time. If you make any mistakes or splodge, just use Naggaroth Knight to tidy back up. With the Black Templar now running to the recesses, we're going to start our first highlight, which is Phoenician Purple. So all we're doing is just doing a nice broad strokes across the edges of the armour like so. Don't forget to pick out those rivets as well. There we are, with the first highlight done. We're now going to finish off using Cacophony Purple. So we're just going to try and pick off some of those sharp edges like so. You can make sure you've got a nice point to your brush and take your time. And there we are, with those highlights now applied to the purple armour, our Slaanesh mark armour is finished. So what we're going to do now is move on to the final marked armour, which is Undivided. Now for this we're going to be using a Baden Black as a base paint. We're then going to highlight using Dark Reaper and finish off with a highlight of Administratum Grey. But first of all, let's start with that base paint. So all I'm going to do is just get a couple of dollops onto the palette, and again a little bit of water, just so it's not too thick and goopy. Just mix that in a bit more like so, and then we're ready to start applying it to the model. So all I'm going to do is just start on that armour. So you've got all his armour panels, you've got his helmet and his shield to do. With the armour now base coated in black, we're going to use Dark Reaper as our first highlight. So all we're going to be doing is doing a broad highlight like so, nice and thick. And then we're just going to work around all those armour panels, picking out those rivets as well. With that first highlight now done, we're going to use Administratum Grey for a second highlight. Now this one needs to be a little bit thinner than the previous, just so you get some nice gradient going on. So just take your time, work your way around. If you do make any mistakes, just tidy back up with Dark Reaper again. Remember to make little dots on those rivets as well. There we are, with that highlight now done, our Chaos marked armours are completed. Now there are a couple of things to remember when painting these models. Firstly, when using contrast paints or shades, try not to overload your brush as it can quickly run out of control. If you do find it happening, just use your brush to soak up any excess. And also when doing any highlighting, especially edge highlighting, try and get a nice point to your brush, and sometimes thin those paints down a little bit more because it will stay wetter for longer. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed painting your own Chaos marked armours, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.